Welcome. If you are here tonight, it is because something within you has already spoken. Though you may not yet know its language, I ask you to treat this room as though it were a dream you have entered. We are not seated upon wooden chairs in a hall, but within the chamber of the psyche, a place both real and imaginal. In this chamber, the walls breathe, the air remembers, and in our midst, a flame of attention is lit, as though to keep vigil for what might emerge from the shadows. The words you have seen upon the invitation, Jung's final warning to empaths, they're feeding on your light, vertical bar, Carl Jung's mystical dialogue, are not merely a title, but a living question. It is not a verdict, but a summons. What does it mean that one could feed upon another's light? What does it mean to be porous, to feel so much of the world that your own edges blur? We begin here not in condemnation, but in inquiry, for the empath is not a mistake of nature. Sensitivity is not an arrow, yet untempered by consciousness, sensitivity becomes a wound that bleeds into every exchange. The empath imagines they are giving freely, but often they are compelled by fear, fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of being unloved, and so they hand over their light piece by piece until they scarcely recognize their own face in the mirror of the soul. Imagine, if you will, a cloister garden at dusk. A fountain trickles in the center, and the last rays of the sun strike its surface. A weary traveler enters, thirsty. He cups his hands and drinks. The water is freely given. It replenishes him. But now imagine that more and more travelers arrive, desperate, insistent, until they climb into the fountain itself, draining it, muddying it, exhausting its source. What then remains for the fountain? Do we call this compassion, or do we call it possession? The fountain must remember it is fed by a hidden spring beneath the earth, and not all mouths may drink endlessly without reverence.
Dr. Jung, when you speak of this feeding on light, I hear it almost as a metaphor, but also as something people in this room might feel in their everyday lives. Could you be more precise? What does it look like in practice? How do I know if my so-called light is being fed upon, or if I am simply offering care as any decent person should?
A good and necessary question. James, lower precision matters. For otherwise, these matters dissolve into vague sentiment. In lived experience, the feeding upon your light may appear in small ways. You leave a conversation more tired than when you entered. Though you have done nothing strenuous, you feel a heaviness that is not yours, like wearing another's coat that does not fit. You notice that in the presence of certain people, your dreams change darker, more chaotic, as though carrying their unlived life within your sleep. These are not acts of generosity, but of theft unnoticed. When one has not yet claimed the boundary between self and other, do not mistake me. There is nothing wrong with listening, with aiding, with embracing, but the test lies here. Does the exchange leave you enlarged, deepened, more human, or does it leave you hollowed, scattered, diminished? Empathy without consciousness, becomes an open wound through which archetypal forces enter and drain vitality. With consciousness, empathy becomes attunement, the capacity to suffer without dissolving into.
I would like to share a dream, if that is welcome.
Yes, Mira, dreams are the royal road, as Freud once said, but more than that, they are the nightly letters from the self. Speak, and we will listen together.
In the dream, I was walking through a cathedral. The stone arches were enormous, and I felt very small. Candles lined the aisles, but as I passed, each one extinguished. The further I went, the darker it became. At the far end, where the altar should be, there was a mirror. When I looked in, the reflection was not mine, but the face of someone I once loved, who always demanded so much of me. I felt both sorrow and anger, but I could not look away. Then the candles behind me began to relight themselves, one by one, though I did not touch them.
Thank you. Mira, this dream, like all dreams, does not offer us doctrine, but image, and the image is alive. The cathedral is the archetypal container, vast and sacred, but also intimidating. The extinguishing candles may speak of how your light, one flame at a time, was given away or perhaps suppressed as you walked deeper into the presence of a demanding other. The mirror at the altar, how striking, for the altar is where one expects to meet the divine, and yet instead you encounter the demanding face of the past. This is transference of the psyche, showing you how an old relationship has usurped the sacred center of your inner church. Yet, Mira, notice what happens. As you face this mirror, the candles relight behind you of their own accord. Here the dream warns but also redeems. Your light is not extinguished forever. It is rekindled by a force beyond conscious will. That is the self at work, not the ego striving, but the deep source restoring balance. Do not take this literally. Do not imagine that every candle in waking life must now relight itself. Respect the image. It has given you a drama of soul in miniature. To interpret ethically is to bow before the image, not to enslave it to a slogan. What we see here is the empathic soul's drama. Extinguished flame by demand of another, yet secretly restored by the hidden fire of the self. The warning lies in the mirror. What you worship may not be God, but another's hunger, wearing the mask of divinity. The promise lies in the candles. The self does not abandon what is essential. And so I say again, with compassion and with urgency, if you avoid the shadow, if you hand over your light to every mirror that beckons, you will pay the price in emptiness. The cost of refusing the shadow is your own life force. The cost of carrying everyone else's unlived shadow is the dimming of your own flame. And yet, to turn and face the shadow is to find that luminous fountain beneath the earth, the spring that replenishes without end. This is the threshold upon which each of you stands.
I need to push back here. I hear the beauty of the images, but in the real world, when I'm at work, for instance, and my colleagues lean on me constantly, or in a relationship where someone keeps expecting me to carry their burdens What is the difference between being empathetic and being exploited? It feels blurry, and not everyone can walk away from these situations.
Blurry. Yes. Life is never as tidy as theory. The difference, James, rests in whether the exchange is mutual or unilateral, conscious or unconscious. Projection is when the other places their unlived self upon you, making you carry it as though it were yours. Perception is when you see the other as they truly are, without confusion. If you are perpetually drained, if your own dreams and desires shrink while theirs expand, then you are caught in projection's net. Carry this line with you as a touchstone. What nourishes both belongs. What drains one to feed the other? Poison. That is not a moral decree, but an experiential compass. The line is simple, but it must be lived, not merely remembered. To discern what nourishes both and what poisons one is the work of individuation. And individuation is not luxury, it is necessity. If you wish to remain whole, Carl Jung, let us practice something together, not with eyes closed, as in meditation, but with eyes open, so that we remain here in the shared chamber. Allow your gaze to rest softly upon a single point in this room, perhaps the corner of the table or the fold of another sleeve. Do not stare, but let your gaze be receptive. Notice the space between yourself and that point. Feel the invisible line of relation stretching from your body toward it. Now, imagine that line glowing faintly with your own life force. Ask yourself silently, is this line nourishing both, or is it draining one? If draining, imagine drawing back just enough of your own light so that balance returns, not to sever, not to reject, but to restore proportion. Hold this awareness for a few breaths, and now release the image. Let your gaze wander again. This small act is a rehearsal. In time, it becomes instinct. We must learn to feel the currents of energy as one feels the breeze across the skin. Empathy does not mean drowning. It means standing at the riverbank, hands cupped, knowing when to drink and when to step back.
I feel resistance. It sounds so gentle when you speak. But when I imagine pulling back my light, I feel guilty. As if I were abandoning someone. As if by keeping even a little for myself, I was cruel. There is grief in it. Like leaving a child in the dark.
Yes, Mira, this is the grief of the archetype of the mother twisted into possession. It is the shadow of maternal love, which binds rather than nourishes. You feel you are abandoning, but in truth you are allowing the other to grow. When you carry their shadow endlessly, you rob them of the necessity to face themselves. Compassion is not the same as rescue. The self does not demand that you abandon others, but it demands that you abandon the illusion of saving them by annihilating yourself. This is why individuation is a paradox. It does not discard relationship. It purifies it. It frees you from possession so that when you do give, it is not compulsion but choice. The archetypal mother within you must learn that love without boundaries is not love but fusion. And fusion is the death of both. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are the chalice that holds the wine. Lest it spill into the dirt, notice how the field of this room shifts. Someone here will have seen a small coincidence tonight, a glance, a sound, an image repeated. Perhaps the bell we have just heard feels like an answer to a silent question. This is what I call synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence, not reducible to cause and effect, but carrying the resonance of inner necessity. Do not cheapen it with fortune-telling or superstition. Synchronicity is not a promise of outcome. It is a mirror in time reflecting the state of the psyche. The bell tolls not to foretell your destiny, but to echo what we are speaking. A boundary, a turning, a threshold. The empath who fears boundaries receives the bell as a reminder that even the invisible must be marked, that time itself rings the change of seasons.
May I ask something on behalf of others? I can imagine people here feeling that even if they hear you, even if they set boundaries, they will relapse into old patterns. They'll be drawn back by guilt, by old habits, by the sheer gravity of their empathy. How do we trust that we will not fall again?
A real question, and it is answered not by argument, but by story. Once there was a village at the edge of a forest. Each night a great bonfire was lit in the square. The people drew near for warmth, but one man, too fearful of darkness, carried burning torches into the forest, giving them to the shadows he imagined. He thought he was saving them from cold. Each night he returned with fewer torches, until the village fire grew small. The villagers grew weak, chilled. One night an elder stopped him. "The shadows you feed are not strangers," she said. "They are your own unlit places. They do not need your torches. They need your eyes." And when he faced the forest without fire in his hands, he saw that the trees were not monsters, but the same wood that sustained the village flame. The parable is clear. You need not trust that you will never fall. You need only trust that when you fall, you may stand again. If you learn to see that the shadows are not others alone, but your own. Now the synthesis comes into view. You have heard of shadow and self, of projection and possession. You have felt the tension between empathy and depletion. All of this is one movement. The ego clinging to safety by dissolving into others, the self calling it back into center. Recall the luminous metaphor I spoke earlier, the fountain beneath the earth. At first we imagined it as the secret source feeding the surface waters, but let us now see it more deeply. The spring beneath the earth is not only replenishment, it is the self itself, inexhaustible, but only accessible when you cease letting others climb into your basin. The fountain evolves from victim to steward, from being drained to being a guardian of the spring. To be empathic without consciousness is to be the fountain trampled. To individuate is to stand as guardian of the living source, allowing water to flow, but not to be stolen. The shadow is not your enemy, but the threshold keeper. It insists that you see what you would rather abandon. It insists that you face the mirror at the altar and recognize the false god of possession. And when you do, you step into the deeper current of the self, where empathy becomes compassion without depletion, relationship without erasure, light that does not dim when shared. I thank you for your attention tonight. Remember, we have not solved the riddle. We have entered it. This room is a dream, and tomorrow it will dissolve, but what you carry into waking will remain. I offer this benediction. May you guard the fountain of your light with reverence. May you face the mirror at the altar and no longer mistake hunger for divinity. May you walk with your shadow at your side, not as thief, but as companion. And may you know that individuation is not isolation, but the birth of a self who can love without being devoured. May the light you keep become the light that guides, not the flame that is consumed. We are not finished. The warning is not meant to frighten, but to awaken. Empaths live at the threshold where the world's pain enters the soul like smoke through an open window. You have felt it, the heaviness that clings, the sorrow that is not yours, the fatigue. After listening, you have thought this was love, but it was possession. I tell you this not to strip you of compassion, but to restore it. For compassion is not the same as merging. Compassion stands at the edge, sees the suffering of another, and does not confuse it with its own life. To confuse is to drown. To see clearly is to serve.
When you say possession, it frightens me. Do you mean literally as in spirits? Or do you mean psychologically? Like being overtaken?
Both. Mira, the psyche does not draw such hard boundaries as the intellect would wish. Possession may come as an archetypal force, anger, grief, desire, moving through you as if it were yours alone, though it belongs to the collective. Or it may come as literal identification with another, so complete that you forget where they end and you begin. In either case, the result is the same. Your own center is eclipsed.
But isn't there some part of us that wants to be eclipsed? To give in? To lose ourselves? Isn't that part of intimacy, even of love?
Yes, James, there is a longing in us to dissolve, to lose the burden of separateness. The mystics called it union, the lovers call it ecstasy. But when this longing is unexamined, when it is driven by fear of loneliness rather than by fullness of self, it becomes devouring. What masquerades as intimacy is often regression, a return to the undifferentiated womb of the mother. True union does not erase the self, it magnifies it. Only when you stand firm in your own center can you meet another without consuming or being consumed. This is why my final warning to empaths must be spoken with gravity. They are feeding on your light, not always maliciously, not always consciously, but relentlessly. And unless you awaken to the pattern, you will confuse depletion for devotion. Listen, each time you feel guilty for drawing a boundary, ask yourself, who planted that guilt? Was it truly your conscience, or was it the voice of another who benefits from your self-erasure? This voice often wears the mask of love, but it is the shadow speaking. The shadow of the other lodged in your soul.
I see this in my life. I see how I thought I was loving. But I was only afraid to lose them. I let myself become the altar for their demands. And I feel anger rising. Though I never let it rise before.
Let it rise. Anger is not evil. It is the boundary's first language. It says, enough. If you repress it, it festers as resentment. If you honor it, it clears the air for compassion to breathe. Do not confuse holy anger with hatred. One protects life, the other seeks to destroy. Consider the image of the threshold again. At the threshold of a temple stands a guardian, carved in stone, fierce of face, weapon in hand. This figure is not the enemy, but the protector of the sacred within. So too must your anger become guardian of your light. Without it, the temple is trampled. With it, the temple may welcome those who come in reverence.
But in modern life, we are not temples. We have jobs, families, obligations. If I stand as a guardian at every threshold, I'll lose people. I'll lose opportunities. Isn't there a cost to being so vigilant?
Of course, James, there is always cost. To stand in yourself is to risk rejection, misunderstanding, even solitude. But consider the greater cost. To lose yourself entirely, to become a vessel for others' unlived lives. Better a moment of solitude in truth than a lifetime surrounded in falsehood. The self cannot be found in a crowd that demands your disappearance. Tonight I ask you not to memorize these words, but to feel them. Feel where, in your body, you already know this truth. The tightness in your chest when you give too much, the ache in your back when you carry what is not yours, the headache after swallowing another's rage. These are your body's hieroglyphs, warning you that the psyche is overrun. To heed them is to step into individuation. To ignore them is to invite the slow theft of your own flame.
What if we cannot tell what is ours and what is not? Sometimes it all feels tangled.
Then you must sit in the tangle. Do not rush to cut it apart. Bring the images of your day before you as though they were dreams. Which of them carry your own face? Which wear the borrowed face of another? In time, the distinction sharpens. You learn to say, this belongs to me. This does not. It is an art, not a rule. And the art is learned by listening, not by hurrying. There is a secret here. The empaths believe they are weak, but in truth, they are powerful. So powerful that others instinctively draw from them. The light within them is bright, but unfocused. They have not yet learned that to guard the light is not to dim it, it is to concentrate it, so that when it is given, it is a gift, not a leakage. This is individuation. To know yourself not as the blurred outline of everyone else's desire, but as a singular flame, steady, enduring, mysterious. Only then can you enter relationship not as prey, not as rescuer, but as whole. Let us return then to the beginning. We began with the image of the room as dream, of the fountain hidden beneath the earth. We have touched the mirror at the altar, the candles extinguished and relit, the bell that tolled at just the right instant. These are not ornaments. They are the very language of the psyche speaking itself aloud. You may ask, why such images? Why not clear instructions, direct steps? Because the soul is not a machine, the soul speaks in symbol. And if you strip away the symbol, you strip away its life. The empath is one who has always been porous to symbol, to the moods and unspoken cries of others. And so my final warning is not to abandon your gift, but to give it back its rightful place, to let the symbol remain symbol, to let the pain of others remain theirs, to stand in the dream without becoming the dreamer who forgets they are dreaming.
So, Dr. Jung, if I understand, to live as an empath without being consumed is to remain awake inside the dream, to hold the image without being swallowed?
Precisely, James. To live in the world without being devoured by it. To live in relationship without being erased by it. To stand as self even when the shadow presses close.
And yet, it hurts. To wake is to feel the ache of all I gave away. To see how much of me has been spent already.
Yes, Mira, awakening is always grief before it is joy. One cannot reclaim their light without mourning the years it was squandered. But grief is not the end. Grief is the river you must cross. And on the far shore waits the strength you thought you lacked. Hear me. The psyche is not cruel. It does not reveal what you cannot yet endure. If tonight you feel the weight of all you gave, take it not as condemnation, but as initiation. The self is showing you the ledger so that you may balance it. Do not despair. For every candle extinguished, another can be lit. For every drop drained, the fountain still flows below. And so we come full circle, shadow and self, guilt and boundary, depletion and replenishment. The movement of individuation is not away from others, but through them, beyond them, until you stand in the vast cathedral of your own soul, where no mirror can steal the altar's place.
I think I understand. Not everything, but enough to begin.
That is all that is asked, not to finish, but to begin.
And if we forget? If we leave this room and fall again into old patterns?
Then, remember this, the psyche is patient. It will send another dream, another synchronicity, another symptom. The self does not abandon you. It waits, sometimes in silence, sometimes in fire, sometimes in the face of one who drains you until you say, finally, enough. To forget is not failure. It is another turn of the spiral. Each turn deepens you, even when it feels like repetition. I will leave you now with one final image. Imagine again the fountain beneath the earth, but now see that its waters are not only yours, they are fed by countless hidden streams, each one the light of another who has chosen to guard their own flame. Together they form an underground river, vast and enduring. You are not alone. Every act of individuation adds to that river. Every empath who learns to guard their light strengthens the current, and in time the river rises, unseen yet unstoppable, until the world itself is nourished. Thank you for your listening. May the words not remain here in this chamber, but follow you into the days to come. May you remember that compassion is strongest where it is conscious, that love without boundary is no love at all, and that your light is not for consumption, but for illumination. May you carry your flame not as an offering to those who devour, but as a beacon for those who are ready to see